We're raised on stories where worth is something you earn, where if you're just kind enough, patient enough, selfless enough, the universe will finally see your value and reward you with love. The fairy tales promise that inner beauty outshines everything else, that true love sees past the surface to the soul beneath. But here's the bitter truth they never whisper. The world stops believing in your inner beauty the moment it recoils from your outer scars. I learned this the day my own father offered me up like damaged goods, desperate to settle a debt that would have destroyed him. Not because I was cruel or wicked, but because I was scarred. Because I couldn't shift like my perfect sister could. Because my womb was as empty as my future. Because when people looked at my face, they turned away. The Alpha King needed an Omega. The reasons were whispered about but never spoken aloud. My father needed to pay what he owed. I became the answer to both problems, not because anyone wanted me, but because no one else would take me. They dressed me in white lace and ivory silk. They covered my face with a veil so delicate it seemed made of moonlight and lies. They walked me down an aisle lined with hundreds of witnesses who had come to see their king claim his bride. And when the ceremony reached that inevitable moment when tradition demanded he lift the veil and look upon the face of the Omega he'd just bound himself to for life, the Alpha King froze. His hand hovered at the edge of the lace. The chapel fell silent. Every eye watched, every breath held. I had survived being unwanted my entire life. I had endured rejection, humiliation, and abandonment. But nothing had prepared me for the look in his eyes when he finally saw what lay beneath the veil. Chapter 1. 3 weeks earlier, I sat in the corner of my father's study, pretending to be invisible. It was a skill I'd perfected over 23 years of existence, the art of taking up so little space that people forgot you were there at all. My sister Rosalind sprawled across the velvet settee, her golden hair catching the afternoon light like liquid sunshine. She was discussing her latest suitor, some beta from the eastern provinces who'd sent her pearls and poetry. My stepmother listened with rapt attention, occasionally offering advice on how to string him along without committing. I kept my eyes on my book, a collection of old folk tales I'd read so many times the pages were soft as cloth. The words blurred together. I wasn't really reading. I was doing what I always did, disappearing into stories because reality had no place for me. The seamstress confirmed the measurements, my stepmother was saying. The blue silk will be perfect for the spring festival. It'll make Rosalind's eyes look absolutely. The study door slammed open. My father stood in the doorway, his face the color of spoiled meat. Behind him loomed 2 figures in dark uniforms, the King's Guard, their silver insignias gleaming like threats. Out! My father barked at Rosalind and my stepmother. Now! Rosalind's eyes went wide. My stepmother opened her mouth to protest, then seemed to think better of it. They swept from the room in a rustle of skirts, but not before my stepmother shot me a look that said, "This is somehow your fault." The guards positioned themselves on either side of the door. One of them, a tall woman with a scar bisecting her left eyebrow, let her gaze travel over me with the kind of assessment usually reserved for livestock. My father moved to his desk, his hands shaking as he poured himself whiskey. He drank it in one swallow, then poured another. "Father?" My voice came out smaller than I'd intended. He didn't look at me. "How much do you know about the Alpha King?" The question felt like a trap. Only what everyone knows. He's ruled for 7 years. He's never taken a mate. I hesitated. "They say he's brutal." Brutal. My father laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's one word for it. He finally turned to face me, and what I saw in his eyes made my stomach drop. Not anger. Not even disappointment. Relief. "The king requires an Omega," the scarred guard said. Her voice was flat, bureaucratic, unmated, of age, to be delivered to the palace within 3 days. My father's hands tightened around his glass. "I've made arrangements. In exchange for certain debts being forgiven, I've agreed to provide an Omega from my household." The words took a moment to penetrate. When they did, I felt something cold unfurl in my chest. "Rosalind?" I whispered. My father's laugh was sharp enough to cut. "Rosalind? You think I'd give up Rosalind?" He drained his second glass. "She's beautiful, fertile. She'll make an advantageous match with someone who actually wants her." "No, Isla. Not Rosalind." The way he said my name like it tasted rotten in his mouth told me everything I needed to know. You can't. The words escaped before I could stop them. I'm not. I can't shift. I'm barren. What would the king want with? He didn't specify. The guard interrupted. Only that she be Omega, unmated, delivered alive. She paused. What happens after that is not our concern. This is insane, I said, standing. My book fell to the floor, forgotten. You're selling me to. I'm saving this family. My father's roar filled the study. He swept his arm across his desk, sending papers and ink flying. Do you have any idea what I owe? What they would have taken from us? From Rosalind? His chest heaved. You've been nothing but a burden since the day your mother died birthing you. You can't shift. You can't bear children. You spend your days with your nose in fantasy books, dreaming of worlds that don't exist because this one has no use for you. Each word landed like a blow. I'd known he resented me. But hearing it spoken aloud, the confirmation that I was not just unloved but actively despised felt like drowning. So yes, he continued, his voice dropping to something worse than shouting. Something quiet and final. I'm giving you to the king. And I'm not losing a single night's sleep over it. The scarred guard cleared her throat. The Omega will need to be prepared. Bathed. Dressed appropriately. Medical examination to confirm. She's intact, my father said. And Omega. That's all he asked for. Nevertheless. The guard's tone allowed no argument. We'll return in 3 days at dawn. Have her ready. They left without another word, the door clicking shut behind them with a sound like a coffin closing. I stood there, my legs trembling, trying to process what had just happened. My father poured himself a third drink. Father, please. I hated how my voice shook. There has to be another way. I could. You could what? He finally looked at me, really looked at me, and what I saw in his face was worse than hatred. It was indifference. Work? With that face? Who would hire you? Marry? What man would want a barren Omega, who can't even shift into her wolf? He shook his head. At least this way, you'll finally be useful. Your existence will have purchased something of value. My life for your debts. Your wasted life for Rosalind's future. He corrected. Don't dress it up as some great sacrifice, Isla. You were never going to do anything with your years anyway. At least this way, they'll count for something. I wanted to argue, to scream, to make him see me as something more than a burden to be offloaded. But the words died in my throat because somewhere deep down, hadn't I always known? Hadn't every averted gaze, every whispered conversation that stopped when I entered a room, every comparison to beautiful, perfect Rosalind, hadn't it all been building to this moment? I was disposable. I had always been disposable. What? I swallowed hard. What will he do with me? My father's expression flickered with something that might have been guilt. But it passed quickly, replaced by that same terrible relief. I don't know, he said quietly. And I don't want to. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in my small bedroom, the one at the end of the hall that no one visited, with the window that overlooked the servants' courtyard, and tried to make sense of my new reality. In 3 days, I would be taken to the palace, given to a king I'd never met, for purposes no one would name. The stories I'd read my whole life suddenly felt like cruel jokes. There were no fairy godmothers coming to save me, no magical transformation waiting to make me beautiful and wanted, no prince who would see past my scarred face to the person underneath. Just a transaction. A debt paid with flesh. I rose from bed and moved to my mirror, the small, tarnished one that had been my mother's. In the candlelight, my reflection looked ghostly. The scar that ran from my left temple down across my cheek to my jaw was a pale, puckered line. A gift from a kitchen fire when I was 6, when I'd been too slow, too clumsy, too human without my shift to protect me. The burn had healed badly. The healers had done what they could, but Omega healing was weak without the wolf. What remained was a face that made children cry and adults look away. I traced the scar with my fingertips. This was what the Alpha King would see when he claimed me. This was what had made me worthless enough to trade. A soft knock at my door made me jump. Isla, Rosalind's voice, uncertain. Can I come in? I almost said no. But what was the point? It's open. My sister slipped inside, closing the door behind her. In her nightgown, with her hair loose around her shoulders, she looked like something from one of my storybooks. Beautiful. Perfect. Everything I wasn't. I heard, she said softly. Father told Mother. She's upset. Upset that he's trading me, or upset that he won't get a good bride price for me first. Rosalind flinched. That's not fair, isn't it? I turned away from the mirror to face her. Tell me, sister, if the king had asked for an Omega, would Father have given me up if you weren't here to take my place in his affections? She was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, she finally admitted. But Isla, I'm scared for you. The things they say about the Alpha King are probably true. I finished. Powerful men don't stay unmarried for 7 years unless there's a reason. And they don't demand Omegas be delivered to the palace like tributes, Rosalind whispered. The word hung between us, heavy with implication. I wish I could help, she said. And the terrible thing was, I believed her. Rosalind had never been cruel to me. She'd simply been better at everything that mattered in our world. And how could I hate her for being what I could never be? You can't, I said. No one can. She crossed the room and pulled me into a hug. I stood stiff in her embrace, not quite able to return it. Because underneath the sympathy I could feel the relief. Relief that it wasn't her. Relief that she would get to keep her beautiful future while I paid for it with mine. I'll miss you, she whispered against my hair. I didn't answer. Because we both knew it was a lie. Chapter 2. The 3 days passed like a fever dream, too fast and too slow all at once. My stepmother ordered the servants to prepare me, as if I were a lamb being readied for slaughter. They scrubbed my skin until it was raw, oiled my hair until it shone, and dressed me in a simple gray traveling dress that covered everything from my throat to my wrists to my ankles, as if modesty might somehow compensate for my ruined face. No one spoke to me during the preparations. The servants who had known me my entire life suddenly couldn't meet my eyes. Even Mira, the kitchen maid who'd sometimes saved me extra portions of bread, worked in silence, her hands efficient, but her expression carefully blank. I was already a ghost. Already erased from this household. On the morning of the 3rd day, I woke before dawn. I hadn't packed anything. What was the point? My books would mean nothing where I was going. My clothes were simple. Worn things that would embarrass my father if I arrived at the palace wearing them. I owned nothing of value, except my mother's tarnished mirror, and even that felt too precious to bring into whatever darkness awaited me. So I left it on my bedside table, face down. The king's guard arrived exactly at dawn, as promised. The same scarred woman from before, accompanied by 3 others. They moved through my father's house like shadows, speaking little, their faces revealing nothing. My father waited in the entrance hall. He dressed formally, as if this were a social occasion rather than him selling his daughter. When I descended the stairs, he looked at me once, then away. The papers, the scarred guard said, extending a leather folder. My father took it with shaking hands. Inside, I glimpsed official seals, scrollwork writing, numbers that represented the worth of my life. He signed quickly, his signature a jagged scrawl. The debt is settled? He asked, his voice hoarse. The debt is settled, the guard confirmed. She turned to me. Come. I looked at my father one last time. Waiting for… what? An apology? A moment of regret? Some indication that this decision cost him anything at all? But he just stood there, the signed papers clutched in his hands like a lifeline, and said nothing. Rosalind appeared at the top of the stairs, her hand pressed to her mouth. My stepmother stood behind her, one hand on her daughter's shoulder. They watched me leave the way you'd watch a funeral procession, sad perhaps, but ultimately relieved it wasn't them in the casket. The guards led me outside to a black carriage bearing the royal crest, a wolf's head crowned in silver. The door stood open like a mouth. Inside, the scarred guard ordered. I climbed in. The seats were soft leather, the interior draped in dark velvet. Expensive. Beautiful. A cage lined with silk. The guard climbed in after me, followed by 1 other. The remaining 2 took positions on the driver's bench. The door shut with a definitive thunk, and then we were moving, pulling away from the only home I'd ever known. I didn't look back. The journey to the palace took 6 hours. The guards didn't speak except to murmur occasionally to each other about routes and timing. I sat in silence, watching the landscape change through the small carriage window. We passed through 3 towns, each one growing progressively larger and wealthier. The buildings transformed from simple wood and thatch to stone and slate. The people in the streets wore finer clothes. More shifters, fewer humans. More alphas and betas, fewer omegas. The hierarchy was visible in everything: who walked on which side of the street, who stepped aside for whom, who made eye contact and who kept their gaze down. In this world, power was determined by your designation at birth, and omegas were at the bottom of every ladder that mattered. Except one: fertility. Omegas could bear children more easily than betas, and alpha children always came from omega wombs. It was the single currency we possessed, and I didn't even have that. "We'll arrive within the hour," the scarred guard said, breaking the long silence. She studied me with those sharp, assessing eyes. "You'll be taken directly to the king's chambers." My stomach clenched. Not to servants' quarters? Or the king's chambers, she repeated firmly. "You'll bathe. You'll be examined by the royal physician. You'll be dressed appropriately." She paused. "And then you'll be presented to him." What does he want with me? The question escaped before I could stop it. Please. If he's going to, I couldn't finish the sentence. Something flickered across the guard's face. Not quite sympathy, but not quite indifference either. "I don't know," she said finally. "The king doesn't explain his requirements. We fulfill them." "Has he done this before? Demanded omegas be brought to him?" "No." The guard's jaw tightened. "You're the first." Somehow, that made it worse. Whatever the Alpha King wanted with me, it was unprecedented, special, and nothing about being special in a predator's eyes felt like a blessing. The carriage began to slow. Through the window, I caught my first glimpse of the palace. It rose against the sky like a mountain of white marble and glass, impossibly tall, impossibly beautiful. Towers spiraled upward, their peaks crowned with silver that caught the afternoon sun and blazed like fire. Gardens sprawled in geometric perfection. Fountains sparkled. Guards in pristine uniforms stood at intervals like statues. It was magnificent. It was terrifying. The carriage rolled through gates that seemed designed to dwarf anyone who passed beneath them. We traveled down a long tree-lined drive, and with each passing moment, I felt myself shrinking, becoming smaller, less significant. By the time we stopped at the palace's rear entrance, not the grand front doors, I noticed, but a service entrance, I felt like I might disappear entirely. "Out," the scarred guard commanded. My legs trembled as I stepped down from the carriage. We'd stopped in a cobblestoned courtyard, surrounded by high stone walls. Several other guards waited here, along with a tall, thin woman in severe black clothing. Her hair was pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her skin. "The Omega?" the woman asked, her tone clipped. "Delivered as requested," the scarred guard confirmed. She glanced at me one last time, and I could have sworn I saw something like pity in her eyes. Then she climbed back into the carriage, and they were gone, leaving me alone with strangers. The woman in black circled me slowly, her gaze cataloging every flaw. When she reached my scarred side, she stopped. "Turn your face toward the light." I obeyed. The sun hit my scar directly, making it stand out even more starkly against my pale skin. I waited for her to recoil, to flinch, to show the disgust I'd seen on 1,000 other faces. But she just nodded once, as if confirming something. "This way." She led me into the palace through the service entrance. The corridors here were plain, no artwork, no elegant furnishings, bare stone and flickering torchlight. We passed servants carrying linens, guards on patrol, kitchen staff hauling supplies. Some glanced at me curiously. Most ignored me entirely. We descended a staircase. Then another. The air grew cooler, damper. The walls changed from finished stone to rough-hewn rock. We were going underground. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice echoing slightly. "The king's private chambers," the woman replied without turning around. "Underground? The king prefers privacy." That didn't sound ominous at all. We traveled deeper into the earth. the corridor narrowing until we reached a heavy iron door guarded by 2 massive alphas. They straightened when they saw the woman in black. "The Omega for the king," she announced. One guard unlocked the door. It swung open with a groan of metal, revealing a descending spiral staircase lit by oil lamps. The smell of damp stone, and something else, something wild and animal, drifted up from below. "Down," the woman ordered. Every instinct I possessed screamed at me to run. This was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. Kings lived in towers, not dungeons. This wasn't chambers, this was a pit. A prison. But where would I run to? Back to my father, who'd signed the papers that made me property. Out into a city where I knew no one, and had no currency except a body no one wanted. I descended the stairs. The woman in black followed, her footsteps precise and measured behind me. Down and down we went, spiraling deeper into the earth. The air grew thick with that wild scent, fur and musk, and something that made my Omega instincts twitch with recognition and fear. Alpha. Powerful Alpha. Dangerous Alpha. Finally, the staircase ended at another corridor. This one was different from anything I'd seen above. The walls were smooth obsidian, polished to a mirror shine. The floor was covered in thick, dark carpets that muffled our footsteps. Oil lamps burned in silver sconces, their light warm and golden, beautiful, luxurious, and somehow worse than the bare stone had been. We passed several doors, all closed. Finally, the woman stopped at one near the corridor's end. She produced a key and unlocked it. "Inside," she said, "bathe thoroughly. The physician will examine you. Then I'll return with appropriate clothing." Her expression remained neutral. "Do not try to leave this room. The guards outside will prevent it." So I was a prisoner. Whatever fig leaf of choice this might have masqueraded as, that word made it clear. I stepped inside. The woman shut the door behind me, and I heard the lock click into place. The room was not what I expected. It was large, perhaps 20 feet square, with the same polished obsidian walls. But there was a real bed, a massive thing with dark furs and soft-looking pillows. A wardrobe stood against one wall. A table and chairs sat near what looked like a small library of books. And in the far corner, a copper bathtub filled with steaming water. Someone had prepared this room for me. Recently, the water was still hot. I moved to the tub slowly, half expecting this to be some kind of trap, but nothing happened. It was just a bath. Soap that smelled of lavender sat on a small table beside it, along with soft cloths and what looked like scented oils. My reflection rippled in the water's surface. I looked small, terrified. The scar on my face seemed even more prominent in the lamplight. This was what the Alpha King had purchased. This was what he'd demanded be delivered to his underground chambers. A broken Omega no one else wanted. I undressed slowly, folding my traveling dress out of habit even though I suspected I'd never wear it again. The water was almost too hot, but I sank into it anyway, letting it burn away the grime of travel and the chill that had settled into my bones. I scrubbed my skin until it was pink, washed my hair until it squeaked clean, used the oils because they were there and because some small, ridiculous part of me still wanted to be presentable. As if being clean might somehow make what was coming easier to endure. I'd just finished dressing in the simple white shift that had been left on the bed when I heard the lock turn. The woman in black entered, followed by a man with silver hair and the weary eyes of someone who'd seen too much. He carried a physician's bag. "Sit," he ordered, gesturing to the bed. The examination was clinical and humiliating. He checked my eyes, my teeth, my reflexes. He pressed cold instruments against my chest and back, listening to my heart and lungs. And then came the part I'd been dreading, the confirmation of my greatest shame. "You cannot shift," he said. It wasn't a question. "No. And you are barren." The word stabbed through me. "Yes." He made notes in a leather journal. "How long have you known?" "Since my first heat. 3 years ago. Nothing happened." "No. No fertility signs." The healers tested me. They said my womb was. I swallowed. Damaged. Probably from the same fever that kept my wolf from emerging. The physician nodded, still writing. When he finished, he looked at me with something that might have been pity. "The king has been informed of your condition," he said. "He selected you knowing." The words took a moment to register. What? Your father disclosed your infertility in his initial communication. The king chose you specifically because of it. The physician snapped his bag shut. I don't know why. That's not my concern. But you should know whatever he wants with you, it's not breeding. He left before I could form a response. The woman in black moved to the wardrobe and withdrew a dress. It was beautiful, deep, crimson silk that shimmered in the lamplight, with long sleeves and a neckline that would cover my collarbones. Modest. Expensive. Put this on, she instructed. My hands shook as I obeyed. The silk felt like water against my skin. The dress fit perfectly, as if it had been made for me. Which it probably had been. How long had the king been planning this? The woman produced a brush and worked through my damp hair with efficient strokes. Then she stepped back, examining me like a painting that hadn't quite turned out right. He's waiting, she said finally. Try not to disappoint him more than you already will. She led me from the room, back down the obsidian corridor to a door at its very end. This one was larger than the others, made of dark wood carved with intricate patterns, wolves running, hunting, howling at an absent moon. The woman knocked 3 times. Enter, a voice called from within, deep, commanding, the kind of voice that expected immediate obedience. The woman opened the door but didn't follow me inside. Instead, she placed one hand on my lower back and pushed. I stumbled forward into the room beyond. The door shut behind me, and I found myself face to face with the Alpha King. Chapter 3. The first thing I noticed was the size of the room. It was enormous, more hall than chamber, with vaulted ceilings that disappeared into shadow, and walls lined with more books than I'd ever seen in one place. A massive fireplace dominated one wall, flames crackling and casting dancing shadows across everything. The furniture was sparse but elegant, a desk covered in papers and maps, several high-backed chairs, and in the center of the room, a table set for 2. The second thing I noticed was the man standing with his back to me, staring into the fire. He was tall, taller than any alpha I'd ever seen, with broad shoulders that strained against his black shirt. His hair was dark, hanging just past his collar. Even from behind, he radiated power, the kind that made my Omega instincts scream at me to bare my throat, to submit, to make myself as small and unthreatening as possible. Come closer, he said without turning around. I forced my feet to move. Each step felt like walking toward the edge of a cliff. When I was perhaps 10 feet away, I stopped. I said closer. I took 3 more steps. My heart hammered so hard I was certain he could hear it. Look at me. I kept my gaze on the floor. It seemed safer somehow. Looking at him felt like it would make this real in a way I wasn't ready to face. That wasn't a request, Omega. The command in his voice was undeniable. My head lifted against my will, and I found myself staring at the Alpha King. He was younger than I'd expected, perhaps 30, certainly no older. His face was all sharp angles and hard lines, handsome in the way a blade is handsome, beautiful and dangerous. His eyes were the color of amber, and they fixed on me with an intensity that felt like being pinned by claws. For a long moment, he simply looked at me. His expression revealed nothing, no disgust, no disappointment, no reaction at all to my scarred face. It was worse than revulsion somehow. At least revulsion was a response. This was evaluation, assessment. Turn, he ordered. Slowly, I obeyed, rotating in place while those amber eyes catalogued every inch of me. When I'd completed the circle and faced him again, he moved closer. So close I could smell him pine and smoke, and something wild that made my knees weak. He reached out, and I flinched. His hand stopped inches from my face. I'm not going to hurt you, he said, though his tone suggested he found my fear tiresome. I want to see the scar properly. His fingers touched my chin, tilting my face toward the firelight. His skin was warm, his grip firm but not painful. He studied the puckered line that ran down the left side of my face with the same clinical detachment the physician had shown. A burn, he observed. When I was 6. A kitchen accident. And it didn't heal because you cannot shift. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. Yes. The physician confirmed you're barren. The word still felt like a slap. Yes. Good. He released my chin and stepped back. That's exactly what I need. Of all the responses I'd braced myself for, that wasn't one of them. What? Sit. He gestured to the table. You must be hungry. I was, actually. I hadn't eaten since the previous evening, too nervous to keep anything down. But the thought of eating while he watched felt impossible. I'm not hungry. I lied. His eyebrow rose. You're a terrible liar. Sit. Eat. We have much to discuss. When I didn't immediately obey, he sighed. I can hear your stomach from here, Omega. Don't insult both our intelligence by pretending otherwise. Heat flooded my cheeks. I moved to the table and sat in the chair he indicated. The food laid out was more elaborate than anything I'd seen in months. Roasted meat, fresh bread, still warm from the oven, vegetables glazed with butter and herbs, fruits I couldn't even name. The king sat across from me and began serving himself with the casual ease of someone completely comfortable in his own power. He ate a few bites, watching me over the rim of his wine glass. You're not eating, he observed. I don't understand what's happening. You're having dinner with the king. It's fairly straightforward. You bought me from my father, had me dragged to an underground chamber, examined like livestock. And now you want to have dinner? My voice rose despite my best efforts to keep it level. Nothing about this is straightforward. Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. Fair enough. He set down his glass. Ask your questions. I'll answer what I can. Why me? Because you're perfect for what I need. I'm barren, scarred, I can't shift. I'm everything I require, he interrupted. Your father was quite thorough in his description of your shortcomings. That's precisely why I chose you. The words should have hurt. Instead, they just confused me. I don't understand. I need an Omega for appearances. Someone to present as my mate. Someone who won't complicate things by actually bearing children or having any real power. He leaned back in his chair. You're barren, so there's no risk of heirs. You're Omega, so it satisfies the council's demands that I take a mate. And based on your father's description, you're desperate enough not to refuse. Each word landed like a stone in my stomach. You want a fake mate. I want a convenient one. There's a difference. What's in it for me? The question came out before I could stop it. His lips curved in what might have been a smile. You're in a position to negotiate now? You said I could ask questions. So I did. He studied me for a moment. What do you want? Isla. Hearing my name in his voice sent an odd shiver down my spine. How do you know my name? I know everything about you. Your father was very forthcoming when his debts were at stake. He tapped his fingers against the table. 23 years old. Can't shift. Barren. Scarred from a kitchen fire that should have been prevented if anyone had been watching you properly. Spent most of your childhood being compared unfavorably to your beautiful, fertile half-sister. You read excessively. You avoid mirrors. You haven't left your father's house in over 2 years because the stairs became too much to bear. My throat tightened. Hearing my entire pathetic existence summarized so clinically felt like being flayed open. So I'll ask again, he continued. What do you want? Freedom, I whispered. You'll never have that. No one does. Then, safety. From what? From you. The words hung in the air between us. The king's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Something that looked almost like respect. I told you I wouldn't hurt you, he said quietly. I don't intend to. What I need from you doesn't require violence. Then what do you need? He stood and moved to the fireplace, his back to me once more. When he spoke, his voice was different, harder, with an edge that suggested old wounds. 7 years ago, I inherited a kingdom in chaos. My father had been unwell for some time before his death. He'd made promises he couldn't keep, alliances that benefited no one, decisions that nearly bankrupted us. I've spent these years cleaning up his disasters, rebuilding, making the hard choices no one else would make. He paused. The council has been patient, but their patience is ending. They want me to marry, to produce an heir, to prove I'm not like my father, that I won't die leaving another mess behind. So marry, I said. Surely there are hundreds of Omegas who would. I don't want a real mate. The words came out sharp, final. I don't want the complication of an actual marriage. I don't want someone who'll demand my time, my attention, my affection. And I certainly don't want children, not until I'm certain this kingdom is stable enough that they won't inherit another disaster. So you want me to pretend? I want you to play a role. Appear at state functions. Stand beside me when required. Let the council believe I've fulfilled their demands. He turned to face me. In exchange, you'll have everything your father's house could never give you. Your own chambers, servants, money, books, as many as you want. Freedom to do as you please when you're not needed for appearances. It sounded too good to be true, which meant it probably was. What's the catch? The catch, he said slowly, is that you can never leave. Once you're presented as my mate, that's what you'll be publicly, permanently. The council can't know this is an arrangement. No one can. His amber eyes locked onto mine. You'll be trapped here, in this palace, playing this role, for the rest of your life. A beautiful cage instead of your father's house, but a cage nonetheless. And if I refuse? You can't. Your father signed the papers. You belong to me now. He said it matter-of-factly, without cruelty but without apology. But I'd prefer your cooperation. It'll make everything easier. I looked down at my untouched plate. My stomach growled again. A humiliating reminder of how little control I had over anything, not even my own body. Eat, the king said, returning to his seat. We'll discuss the details after. This time, I obeyed. The food was delicious, but I barely tasted it. My mind was racing, trying to find the trap in his offer. Because there had to be one. Men like him, powerful, wealthy, ruthless, didn't make bargains that didn't benefit them more than anyone else. Why me specifically? I asked between bites. If all you needed was a Baron Omega, there must be others. Why go through my father? The king was quiet for a long moment. Because your father owed enough that he couldn't refuse. Because you're desperate enough not to fight this too hard. And because... He hesitated, which seemed uncharacteristic. Because I saw your portrait. My portrait? Your father sent one, along with your sister's, attempting to substitute her at the last moment when he realized what he'd agreed to. The king's expression hardened. I wasn't interested in beautiful, fertile Rosalind. I was interested in you. Why? Because you looked already broken. And broken things don't shatter when you use them for purposes they weren't designed for. The honesty was brutal. But somehow, it was also a relief. At least he wasn't lying to me. Wasn't pretending this was anything other than what it was. A transaction between two people who needed something from each other. When? I asked quietly. When does this start? 3 weeks. There's a ceremony required. The council will expect a proper wedding. Witnesses, all the traditional rituals. He watched me carefully. You'll wear a veil until the critical moment. When I lift it and reveal your face, there will be reactions. People will wonder why you chose someone like me. Let them wonder. I don't answer to gossip. His tone left no room for argument. But you need to understand what you're walking into. This won't be easy. There will be stares, whispers, judgment. People will assume you used dark magic or trickery to ensnare me. They'll call you ambitious, manipulative, unworthy. They already call me worthless. At least ambitious would be a change. The corner of his mouth twitched. You have more spine than I expected. Desperation looks like courage sometimes. Perhaps, he finished his wine. You'll spend the next 3 weeks preparing, learning palace protocols, proper behavior for public appearances, how to move through court without making a fool of either of us. It won't be pleasant, but it's necessary. And after the wedding? After we maintain appearances, you'll have your own chambers, not these. These are mine alone. You'll sleep there, eat there most of the time. Live your life as you see fit, within reason. We'll be seen together when necessary. The rest of the time, I won't bother you. It sounded lonely, but lonely was familiar. I'd been lonely my entire life. One more question, I said. Ask. Why underground? Why do you live down here instead of in the palace proper? His expression shuddered completely. That's not your concern. But, I said it's not your concern, Omega. The command in his voice was absolute. There are parts of my life you don't need to know about. This is one of them. The sudden shift from almost conversational to utterly dominant sent a chill through me. This was the Alpha King everyone feared. This was the ruthlessness that had rebuilt a kingdom. Understood, I whispered. He stood. Someone will come to take you to your temporary chambers. In the morning, your training begins. I suggest you rest while you can. It was a dismissal. I rose on shaky legs and moved toward the door. My hand was on the handle when his voice stopped me. Isla. I turned back. He stood by the fire again, his face half in shadow. Your scar, he said quietly. It doesn't bother me. In case you were wondering. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded and left. The woman in black was waiting outside. She led me back through the obsidian corridors, but this time we went up back toward the surface, toward air and light and the world of the living. My temporary chambers were on the 3rd floor of the palace's east wing. They were beautiful, all pale blues and silvers, with a bed that looked like a cloud and windows that overlooked the gardens. A far cry from my small room at my father's house. Someone will wake you at dawn, the woman said. Be ready. She left without another word, locking the door behind her. I moved to the window and looked out at the moonlit gardens below. Somewhere beyond those walls was the life I'd left behind. My father, already forgetting I existed. Rosalind, sleeping peacefully in the room that would never be mine again. A world that had never wanted me. And here, in this beautiful cage, was a different kind of prison. One with silk sheets and unlimited books. One where I would play at being wanted by a man who'd chosen me specifically because I was broken. I touched my fingers to the cold glass, and wondered which was worse. Being unwanted, or being wanted for all the wrong reasons. The answer, I suspected, was that it didn't matter. I was trapped either way. I climbed into the enormous bed and pulled the covers over myself, trying to remember the last time I'd felt safe, trying to imagine if I ever would again. Sleep, when it finally came, was full of amber eyes and promises that sounded like threats. Chapter 4. Dawn came too quickly. A sharp knock woke me from dreams I couldn't quite remember, something about wolves and mirrors and voices that promised things they couldn't deliver. I sat up, disoriented by the unfamiliar room, the silk sheets, the pale morning light filtering through windows that weren't mine. Then I remembered. The palace, the king, the bargain I'd made because I had no other choice. The door opened without waiting for my permission. A woman entered, not the severe one in black from yesterday, but someone younger, perhaps only a few years older than me. She had warm brown skin and dark hair pulled into a practical braid. Her expression was neutral but not unkind. I'm Vera, she said briskly. I'll be managing your preparation for the wedding. We have 3 weeks and an enormous amount of work to do, so we should begin immediately. She crossed to the wardrobe and began pulling out clothes. First, breakfast, then etiquette lessons, then dance instruction, then, wait. I climbed out of bed, still wearing the white shift from yesterday. All of that? Today? Vera turned to look at me, and for the first time, her professional mask slipped slightly. Something like sympathy flickered across her face. You're going to be presented as the Alpha King's mate in front of the entire court. Every move you make will be scrutinized. Every word analyzed. You need to be perfect, or as close to it as we can manage in 3 weeks. I can't be perfect, I said quietly. Look at me. I am looking at you. Vera's tone was matter of fact. You have a scar. So what? The king chose you. That makes you valuable, regardless of what you look like. She held out a simple day dress in deep green. Now get dressed. We're already behind schedule. The breakfast brought to my room was simple but elegant: fresh bread, soft cheese, sliced fruit, and tea that smelled of bergamot. I ate quickly while Vera outlined the day's schedule with military precision. Mornings will be etiquette and protocol, she explained. How to address different ranks, proper behavior at state functions, what to do with your hands, how to stand, how to sit, how to walk. Afternoons will be dancing. You'll need to know at least 6 formal dances for the wedding reception. Evenings will be history and politics. You need to understand court dynamics. Who's allied with whom? What topics to avoid. My head was already spinning. That's a lot. Yes. Vera didn't sugarcoat it. And that's just this week. Next week we add public speaking practice and wardrobe fittings. The final week will be full rehearsals of the ceremony itself. I don't suppose I can just stay silent and let the king do all the talking? You could, but then everyone would assume you're either stupid or terrified. Neither creates the impression we want. Vera studied me critically. The king chose an unconventional omega. That means you need to give them a reason to accept that choice. Intelligence, grace, confidence, those can compensate for a lot. It was a kinder way of saying your face will always be a problem, so everything else needs to be flawless. Let's begin, Vera said. The etiquette lessons were torture. Vera took me to a small private salon where a woman named Lady Thorne waited, elderly, rail-thin, with eyes like a hawk and a voice that could cut glass. She took one look at me and sighed as if I'd personally offended her by existing. "This is what I have to work with?" she asked Vera. "The king's choice," Vera replied simply. Lady Thorne circled me like a predator evaluating prey. "Posture is atrocious." She slouches like she's trying to disappear. "Walk across the room." I did. Apparently, I did it wrong. Again. "No, slower, shoulders back, head up. You're going to be a queen, girl, not a servant sneaking through hallways hoping no one notices you." Again. We spent 2 hours on walking, just walking, how to glide instead of shuffle, how to hold my head at the correct angle, not too high, arrogant, but not too low, submissive, how to move with purpose but not haste. "Better," Lady Thorne finally conceded, though her tone suggested better was still miles from acceptable. Now, sitting. Sitting was apparently an art form I'd been performing incorrectly my entire life. There were rules about ankle placement, hand position, how much of the chair to use, when to rise, how to arrange skirts. My head pounded with information. When the king enters a room, you stand immediately but don't approach unless invited. When dining, you begin eating only after he does. When walking together, you remain 1/2 step behind, unless— Why? The question burst out before I could stop it. Why do I need to stay behind him? Lady Thorne's expression suggested I'd asked why water was wet. "Because he's the Alpha King and you're Omega. It's the natural order, but I'm supposed to be his mate. Doesn't that—" "You will be his consort," Lady Thorne corrected sharply. "There's a difference. You exist to complement his rule, not challenge it. The moment you forget your place is the moment you make him look weak for choosing you." The words stung because they were true. I wasn't going to be a real partner. I was going to be a prop, a beautiful ornament to prove he'd fulfilled his obligations. Except I wasn't even beautiful. By the time the etiquette lessons ended, my feet ached, my back hurt, and my confidence had been systematically dismantled and rebuilt into something I barely recognized. "Tomorrow we'll work on conversation," Lady Thorne announced as I escaped. "Try not to slouch between now and then." The afternoon dance lessons were somehow worse. The dancing master was a beta named Corvin, with the patience of a saint and the pain tolerance of someone accustomed to having his toes stepped on. The first dance he tried to teach me was something called the moon waltz, a formal, elegant dance that apparently every member of court knew by heart. I didn't know it. I'd never danced with anyone in my life. "Follow my lead," Corvin said gently, taking my hand. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Feel the rhythm. I felt nothing but panic. My feet tangled. I stumbled. When he tried to guide me through a turn, I nearly fell. "I'm sorry," I gasped, pulling away. "I can't do this." "You can," Corvin insisted. "You're just thinking too much. Dance is about feeling, not thinking." "Easy for you to say. You're not the one everyone will be watching." His expression softened. "They'll be watching the king. You just need to not fall. That's a much lower bar." It should have been reassuring. Instead, it just reinforced how little was expected of me. Don't fall. Don't embarrass him. Don't remind everyone too obviously why someone like me should never have been chosen. We practiced for 3 hours. By the end, I could mostly manage the basic steps without causing injury. Progress, apparently. Vera collected me afterward, noting my exhausted expression with sympathy. "How bad?" "I'm a disaster." "You're learning." "That's different." She guided me toward yet another room. "One more thing before dinner." "More lessons?" "Not exactly." She opened a door to reveal a library. Not as massive as the one in the king's underground chambers, but still impressive walls lined with books, comfortable chairs, afternoon light streaming through tall windows. "The king had this prepared for you," Vera said. "Whenever you need a break from training, you can come here. No one will disturb you." I stared at the books, something tight loosening in my chest. He'd remembered. In the middle of everything else, the king had remembered that I loved to read. "Thank you," I whispered. Vera smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from her. "You're welcome. Now, you have an hour before dinner. Use it however you like." She left me alone with the books. I moved through the shelves slowly, running my fingers over leather spines, reading titles, breathing in the familiar smell of paper and ink. Stories about heroes and monsters, histories of kingdoms long fallen, poetry that made my throat tight. I pulled down a worn copy of fairy tales, the same collection I'd had at my father's house, and settled into a chair by the window. The late afternoon sun warmed my skin. For a moment, I could almost forget where I was, what I was preparing for. Then I opened the book and saw a note tucked inside, written in elegant script. "Every cage should have at least one window to something better. Consider this yours, K. K. The king." I read the note 3 times, trying to understand it. Was this kindness? Or just another tool to keep me compliant? Give the desperate Omega some books and she'll stay quiet, stay useful, stay trapped. Maybe both. Maybe it didn't matter. I tucked the note back into the book and began to read. Dinner that evening was brought to my chambers. I ate alone, grateful for the solitude after a day of constant instruction and correction. My body ached. My mind felt stuffed with information it couldn't quite organize. I was preparing for bed when the knock came. "Enter," I called, expecting Vera. Instead, the king walked in. I froze, suddenly aware that I was wearing only my nightgown, my hair loose around my shoulders. He, meanwhile, was still fully dressed in dark trousers and a shirt that did nothing to hide the predatory grace in his movements. "Your Majesty," I managed, starting to bow. "Stop," he waved a hand dismissively. "We're not in public. You don't need to bow to me here." What are you doing here?" "I wanted to see how your first day went." He moved to the window, looking out at the darkening gardens. "Vera said you're struggling." Heat flooded my cheeks. "I'm trying. I've never had to do any of this before." "I know." His tone was neutral. "That's why I'm here." He turned to face me, and in the dim lamplight, his amber eyes seemed to glow. "I need you to understand something, Isla. When we appear in public, you'll need to be convincing. The council, the court, they're looking for any excuse to question my judgment. If you seem uncertain, frightened, or unwilling, they'll assume I forced this match. That reflects poorly on both of us. So I need to pretend to love you. You need to pretend to be comfortable with me. Love comes later, if they're paying attention." He studied me carefully. "Can you do that? Can you look at me without fear?" I met his gaze and held it, even though everything in me wanted to look away. "I'm not afraid of you." "You are. I can smell it. Damn alpha senses." "Fine. I'm afraid. But I'm also," I searched for the right word, "resigned. You're not the worst thing that's happened to me. You're just the most recent." Something flickered in his expression, surprise, maybe, or respect. "That's surprisingly honest." "Thanks for watching. You asked for honesty when we first met. Or was that just for that one conversation?" "No." He moved closer, and I forced myself not to step back. "I prefer honesty. It's simpler than trying to decode lies." He stopped a few feet away. "Ask me something. Anything. Let's practice conversation when no one else is listening." My mind went blank. I don't know what to ask." "Yes, you do. You're full of questions. I can see them in your eyes." He tilted his head slightly. "Ask. Why underground?" The question tumbled out before I could reconsider. "I know you said it wasn't my concern. But it's strange. You're the king. You could live anywhere in this palace. Why choose chambers beneath the earth?" For a long moment he said nothing. Then, "Because I'm not always fit for company." "What does that mean?" It means there are nights when I prefer isolation, when I need to be somewhere no one can reach me, no one can see me, no one can. He stopped, his jaw tightening. It's complicated. Try me. I might be broken and scarred and barren, but I'm not stupid. His lips curved slightly. No, you're not. He moved to one of the chairs near my fireplace and sat, gesturing for me to do the same. What do you know about curses? The question caught me off guard. Only what's in fairy tales. Witches cursing princes. That sort of thing. And if I told you curses were real? My stomach dropped. Are you cursed? That's not an answer to my question. I thought about it carefully. If curses were real, I'd say they're probably more complicated than the stories suggest. More nuanced. Less about true love's kiss fixing everything and more about, I struggled for the right words, more about consequences, prices paid for choices made. He looked at me with something like approval. Exactly. So you are cursed. I didn't say that. You implied it. I implied nothing. I asked a hypothetical question. But his eyes told a different story. There was something he wasn't saying, something about why he lived underground, why he'd waited 7 years to take a mate, why he'd chosen specifically someone barren who couldn't give him heirs. Here's another question, I said, changing tactics. Do you believe in riddles? He blinked, clearly not expecting that. Riddles? Yes, the kind in old stories, where the answer is never what you expect but once you hear it, it's obvious. I suppose I do. Why? I stood and moved to my bag, the small one I'd been allowed to bring from my father's house. From it, I pulled the worn book of fairy tales. There's one I've always loved. My mother used to tell it to me before she died. Tell me. I opened the book to a page I'd marked years ago. I am something you make, but never see. I can be broken without being touched. I bind two people together, but I have no physical form. What am I? The king was quiet, his eyes narrowing slightly as he considered. A promise, he said finally. My heart skipped. How did you know? Because it's the only answer that makes sense. Promises are made, invisible, broken by betrayal rather than force, and they bind people through intention rather than chains. He leaned forward. Why that riddle? Because. I hesitated. Because I think promises are more powerful than people realize. A curse is just a promise that went wrong, isn't it? Magic forcing someone to keep their word. That's a very interesting theory. Is it true? I didn't say I was cursed. You didn't say you weren't. We looked at each other for a long moment. Then he stood. You're cleverer than I expected, Isla. That will serve you well at court. Or get me in trouble. Probably both. He moved toward the door, then paused. The library I had prepared for you. Did you like it? Yes, thank you. Good. You'll need somewhere to escape to. The next 3 weeks will be difficult. He opened the door, then looked back one more time. One more thing. Yes? The riddle. Keep it. We'll use it. Use it how? But he was already gone. The door clicking shut behind him, leaving me alone with more questions than answers, and the strange, unsettling feeling that I'd just seen something of the real man beneath the crown. I looked down at the book in my hands, at the riddle about promises, and wondered what I'd just agreed to without realizing it. Chapter 5. The second week began with wardrobe fittings that felt more like torture than preparation. The royal seamstress, a woman named Deborah with fingers like spider legs and eyes that missed nothing, poked and prodded me for hours. She draped fabrics across my shoulders, held swatches up to my face, muttered to herself about proportions and color theory and how to minimize the damage. The scar draws the eye, she said, circling me for the 100th time. We need to redirect attention. Lower necklines, perhaps. Show the collarbones. Or we could use higher ones to frame the face differently. I'm right here, I said quietly. You know that, right? Deborah barely glanced at me. Yes, dear. Stand straighter. Vera, who'd been observing from a chair near the window, cleared her throat. Perhaps we should focus less on hiding perceived flaws, and more on highlighting her strengths. What strengths? Deborah asked bluntly. Then, seeming to realize how that sounded, she added, I mean in terms of physical attributes suitable for formal wear. Her eyes, Vera said. They're striking, gray-green, unusual. And her figure is good, she just needs to stop slouching. I'd spent so many years trying to disappear that the idea of highlighting anything felt foreign, dangerous even. Being noticed had never ended well for me. But Vera was right about one thing: I was going to be noticed, whether I wanted to be or not. The question was whether I'd be noticed as the scarred Omega the king had settled for, or as something else entirely. Fine, Deborah conceded. We'll work with what we have. But the wedding dress. She pulled out sketches, spreading them across her work table. That needs to be perfect, absolutely flawless. It will be the only thing anyone talks about for months. The designs were beautiful, elaborate gowns with beading and lace, trains that would stretch for yards, sleeves that would catch the light. Each one was a masterpiece. Each one felt like a costume for a role I wasn't qualified to play. This one, Deborah said, tapping a sketch that showed a dress with long lace sleeves, a modest neckline, and intricate embroidery along the bodice and hem. It's regal without being ostentatious, elegant without trying too hard. And the veil. She pulled out another sketch. It will cover your face until the ceremony's critical moment. Traditional, but also practical. Practical. Because no one wanted to look at my face until they absolutely had to. When will it be ready? Vera asked. 1 week. I'll need her for final fittings in 3 days. Deborah began gathering her sketches. And please, make her stop slouching. The dress will hang all wrong if she doesn't stand properly. After she left, I slumped against the wall, exhausted. Does everyone here speak about me like I'm a piece of furniture? Yes, Vera said honestly. But not because they're cruel. Because you're... She searched for the right word. You're a problem they're trying to solve. The king chose you, which means you matter. But you don't fit the expected mold, which means they need to reshape you until you do. I can't be reshaped. I am what I am. Then be it louder. Vera stood and moved to the door. Come. Your dancing has improved enough that Corvin wants to add the wedding dance to your lessons. It's more complex than the others. I groaned. Of course it is. The wedding dance was called the bonding spiral. It involved the couple moving in increasingly tight circles around each other, their hands joining and separating in patterns that supposedly symbolized the weaving together of 2 lives. It was beautiful when Corvin demonstrated it with one of his assistants. It was a disaster when I tried it with him. You're counting the steps, he said patiently after I'd stepped on his foot for the 3rd time. Stop thinking. Feel the music. Feel your partner's movements. This dance is about connection, not precision. How am I supposed to feel connected to someone I barely know? You'll have 3 weeks of seeing him regularly by the time the wedding happens. That's more than many arranged matches get. Corvin reset our positions. Again. And this time, look at your partner. Eye contact is crucial. Looking at Corvin felt awkward but manageable. Looking at the king while performing this intimate dance in front of hundreds of witnesses? That felt impossible. We practiced until my feet were blistered and my head pounded. When Vera finally released me, I limped back to my chambers and collapsed onto the bed. That's where I was sprawled across the covers, shoes kicked off, completely undignified when the king knocked. I shot upright. Come in. He entered carrying a small wooden box. He took one look at me, disheveled, exhausted, definitely not maintaining proper posture, and something like amusement flickered across his face. Rough day? They're trying to turn me into someone I'm not. It's exhausting. Welcome to royalty. He set the box on the table near the fireplace. Every person in this palace is performing a role. The difference is, most of them have been rehearsing their entire lives. And I have 3 weeks. Yes. He studied me for a moment. Come here. I stood and crossed to him, very aware of my bare feet and loose hair. He opened the box to reveal a collection of jewelry, necklaces, bracelets, rings, all made of silver and moonstone. The ceremonial jewelry, he explained. You'll wear these during the wedding. I wanted you to see them before the actual day, so they wouldn't be a surprise. The pieces were stunning. Delicate chains that caught the light, stones that seemed to glow from within. The kind of jewelry I'd only ever seen in paintings. They're beautiful, I whispered. They belong to my mother. He lifted a necklace, a simple chain with a single moonstone pendant. She wore this at her wedding to my father. The weight of that statement settled over us. I was going to wear his dead mother's jewelry while pretending to be his mate. It felt wrong somehow, Sacred things shouldn't be used for deception. I can't wear these, I said quietly. It's not right. They're meant for someone you actually. They're meant for the person standing beside me as I fulfill my obligations to this kingdom. He interrupted. That's you. Whether love is involved or not doesn't change what these represent. What do they represent? He was quiet for a moment, the necklace still dangling from his fingers. Duty. Sacrifice. The willingness to carry weight you never asked for because someone else needs you to. There was something in his voice, a pain I recognized because I'd felt it myself. The burden of being needed for all the wrong reasons. Your mother, I said carefully. Did she love your father? I don't know. She never said. He placed the necklace back in the box with careful precision. But she wore the jewelry. She stood beside him. She played the role. And when he started making the decisions that nearly destroyed this kingdom, she said nothing publicly, even though I know she disagreed with him privately. That must have been terrible. It was necessary. Or so she believed. His amber eyes met mine. I'm not my father, Isla. I won't put you in the position she was in. This is a transaction, nothing more. You don't owe me loyalty beyond what we've agreed to. Just obedience. Just cooperation, he corrected. There's a difference. I wasn't sure there was, but I didn't argue. Instead, I asked the question that had been bothering me since the fitting. What happens after the wedding? You said I'd have my own chambers, my own life. But we'll still need to maintain appearances. What does that actually look like? He moved to the window, his back to me, a position I was starting to recognize as his thinking posture. Monthly court appearances. Formal dinners perhaps twice a week. Any visiting dignitaries will expect to see us together. Major festivals and celebrations. He glanced back at me. The rest of the time? You're free to do as you please. So I'll barely see you. Yes, that's the point. It should have been a relief. Instead, it felt oddly like rejection. Which was ridiculous. This was exactly what we'd agreed to. A convenient arrangement. Nothing more. And if people expect intimacy? The word came out quieter than I'd intended. Eventually, they'll wonder why there are no children. We'll tell them the truth that you're barren. It's hardly a secret. Your father made certain everyone knew. His tone was matter of fact, but something in it made me flinch. Right. The broken omega. How could I forget? He turned to face me fully. I didn't mean. Yes. You did. And you're right. That's what I am. That's why you chose me. I crossed my arms, suddenly cold despite the fire burning in the grate. I just sometimes forget that everyone else sees it too. For a long moment, we looked at each other across the space of the room. Then he did something unexpected. He moved closer, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. Listen to me carefully, he said, his voice low. Yes, I chose you because you're barren. But not because I think you're broken. I chose you because I need someone who can't give me heirs. And you need somewhere that isn't your father's house. That's pragmatism, not judgment. They feel like the same thing. They're not. His hand lifted, hovering near my face the same way it had that first night. May I? I nodded, not trusting my voice. His fingers touched my scar, tracing the puckered line from temple to jaw with surprising gentleness. This doesn't make you broken. It makes you a survivor. There's a difference. Not to most people. I'm not most people. He dropped his hand. And in 3 weeks, when I lift your veil in front of the entire court and show them exactly who I've chosen, everyone will know that what I value isn't what they expected. Let them talk. Let them wonder. Their opinions don't matter. They matter to me. Why? The question was so simple, yet I didn't have a good answer. Because I want to be wanted for the right reasons. Not just because I'm convenient. No one is wanted for the right reasons, Isla. We're all chosen based on what we can provide. Love, companionship, heirs, political alliances. It's all currency. At least with us, the terms are honest. It was a cynical view of the world, but I couldn't entirely disagree with it. Every relationship I'd ever observed had been transactional in some way. At least ours was openly so. I should let you rest, he said, moving toward the door. The next week will be harder than this one. Final dress fittings, ceremony rehearsals, Meeting with the council for their blessing. You'll need your strength. Wait. The word escaped before I could reconsider. The riddle. You said we'd use it. What did you mean? He paused at the door, his hand on the handle. During the wedding ceremony, there's a moment where tradition allows the couple to exchange words. Usually, it's vows or declarations of love. We're going to do something different. Different how? You're going to ask me the riddle. His lips curved slightly. And I'm not going to answer. Why not? Because sometimes the most powerful response is silence. It creates mystery. Makes people wonder what we know that they don't. He opened the door. Besides, the real answer to that riddle isn't something I can say in public. He left before I could ask what he meant. I stood there for a long time, staring at the closed door, trying to understand. The riddle's answer was, a promise. What promise could he not speak aloud? What had he agreed to that required such secrecy? Or was this itself part of the performance, creating the illusion of depth where there was only pragmatic arrangement? I moved to the jewelry box and lifted the moonstone necklace. The stone was cool against my palm, the silver chain delicate enough to seem fragile. But it wasn't fragile. It had survived his mother wearing it, whatever had happened during his father's reign, the years of storage waiting for the next queen. I fastened it around my neck and looked at myself in the mirror. The girl staring back wore a dead queen's necklace and bore scars that would never fully heal. She was preparing to marry a king who'd chosen her specifically because she couldn't give him what everyone else could. She was about to stand in front of hundreds of people and pretend this was real. But maybe, I thought, looking at my reflection, that girl was stronger than anyone gave her credit for. Maybe surviving all the ways she'd been unwanted had prepared her for this, for being wanted in exactly the wrong way, and making something of it anyway. I touched my scar, then the moonstone, feeling the weight of both. In 1 week, I would wear a dress made of lies, and stand beside a man bound by secrets. We would ask, and not answer. We would promise, without speaking. We would bind ourselves together with intentions neither of us fully trusted. And somehow, that felt more honest than any love match I'd ever witnessed. Chapter 6. The Ceremony. The final week passed in a blur of rehearsals and anxiety. Every day, I was walked through the ceremony step by step. Where to stand, when to kneel, how to hold my hands during the blessing, the exact angle at which to tilt my head when the king lifted the veil. Even my breathing was choreographed, slow and steady, never gasping, never revealing the panic that clawed at my chest. You'll process down the center aisle, the ceremony master explained for the dozenth time. He was an ancient beta named Aldrich, with patience worn thin by decades of preparing nervous brides. Alone. No father to give you away, as per the king's instructions. The symbolism is important, you come to him of your own will. Except I didn't, but no one seemed interested in that particular truth. When you reach the dais, you'll kneel. The king will step forward and offer his hand, you'll take it and rise. Then you'll face the high priestess for the binding ritual. Aldrich demonstrated each movement with precision. After the blessing, you'll turn to each other. That's when you'll speak the traditional words, or in your case, the riddle. The riddle had become our secret. Only the king, Vera, and I knew what I would actually say. Everyone else assumed I'd follow tradition. The surprise would be part of the performance. And then? I asked, though I already knew. Then he lifts the veil. You hold position. No flinching, no looking away. Let them see your face clearly. The king will kiss you briefly, nothing improper, and then you'll be presented to the court as their new queen consort. Queen consort. The title felt like wearing clothes that didn't fit. Too big in some places, too tight in others, never quite right. The dress arrived 2 days before the wedding. Deborah brought it herself, along with 3 assistants to help me into it. The fabric was the color of moonlight, not quite white, not quite silver, and covered in embroidery so delicate it seemed impossible that human hands had created it. The lace sleeves were as light as breath. The train stretched behind me for what felt like miles. Don't move, Deborah commanded, as she made final adjustments. The fit needs to be perfect. If you slouch even slightly, the whole line will be ruined. I stood statue still while she pinned and tucked and muttered, When she finally stepped back, Vera gasped. "It's perfect," she breathed. "Isla, look." I turned to the full-length mirror and barely recognized myself. The dress transformed me into something ethereal, something that belonged in fairy tales rather than harsh reality. The embroidery caught the light with every breath, making me seem to shimmer. The lace sleeves covered my arms, while somehow making them look delicate rather than hidden. And the veil was a masterpiece, layer upon layer of lace so fine it was nearly transparent, each layer embroidered with tiny flowers and vines. It would obscure my face without fully hiding it, a preview of what was beneath without the full reveal. "The king will be pleased," Deborah said with satisfaction. "This is my finest work." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to imagine what would happen tomorrow. Hundreds of people watching. The weight of the dress. The moment when the veil came off and everyone saw what their king had chosen. The disappointment in their eyes. The whispers that would follow me forever. Around midnight, someone knocked softly at my door. "Come in," I called, expecting Vera. The king entered, dressed simply in dark trousers and a loose shirt. His hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it. "You should be resting," he said. "So should you. I don't rest well the night before major events." He moved to the window, looking out at the moonlit gardens. "I wanted to make sure you were prepared as someone can be for public humiliation." He turned to look at me. "Is that what you think tomorrow is? Isn't it? You'll lift the veil, everyone will see my face, and they'll spend the rest of the evening wondering what's wrong with you for choosing me. Let them wonder." His voice was firm. "Isla, I need you to understand something. Tomorrow when I lift that veil, I won't hesitate, I won't flinch, I won't show even a moment of doubt or regret. Because I don't feel those things. You should. Why? Because you have a scar? Because you can't shift? He crossed the room to stand in front of me. "I've told you before, those things don't matter to me. They're assets, not flaws. They're exactly what I need." "That's not the same as wanting me." "No," he agreed quietly. "It's not, but it's honest. And in my experience, honesty is rarer and more valuable than desire." I looked up at him, at the amber eyes that had never looked at me with disgust. Only assessment. "Why are you really here?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I wanted to ask you something, about the riddle." "What about it?" "When you ask it tomorrow, do you want to know my answer? The real one?" My breath caught. "You said you wouldn't answer. That the silence was the point. In public, I won't. But here, now, in private, do you want to know?" Did I? Part of me was terrified to know. If the answer was something cold and calculated, it would confirm that this was purely transactional. If it was something deeper, it would complicate everything we'd agreed to. "Yes," I whispered. "I want to know." He moved closer, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from him. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "The answer is the promise I made to myself 7 years ago, when I inherited a broken kingdom and a curse I didn't ask for. The promise that I would fix what my father destroyed, no matter what it cost me personally. That I would put duty above desire, obligation above happiness, necessity above hope." I stared at him. "That's why you're doing this? Some promise you made to yourself?" "Yes. And that's why you're perfect for this role. Because you understand what it means to be bound by circumstances you can't control, to do what's necessary rather than what you want." His hand lifted to my face again, his thumb brushing across my scar. "We're both prisoners of promises, Isla. The only difference is you didn't choose yours. And you think that makes this better? I think it makes us equal. Two people trapped by different cages, finding a way to survive together." He dropped his hand. "Tomorrow, when I lift that veil and kiss you in front of everyone, it won't be about love or desire. It'll be about two people keeping promises no one else understands." That's the saddest thing I've ever heard. Perhaps. His lips curved slightly. But it's true. And truth, as I said, matters more than romance. He moved toward the door, then paused. "One more thing. When the ceremony is done, and we're alone for the first time as a married couple, there's something I need to tell you. Something about why I live underground, why I needed someone barren, Why this arrangement is more complicated than I've let you believe. My stomach dropped. You're cursed. Really cursed. Get some rest, Isla. Tomorrow will be long enough without you being exhausted. He opened the door. And try not to worry about the court. Their opinions mean nothing in the end. Easy for you to say. You're not the one they'll be judging. They've been judging me for 7 years. You develop a tolerance. He looked back one last time. You're stronger than you think. Tomorrow, you'll prove it. Then he was gone, leaving me with more questions than ever, and the terrible suspicion that I was about to marry someone even more broken than I was. The morning of the wedding arrived too soon, and not soon enough. Vera woke me before dawn. An army of servants descended, bathing me in water scented with roses, oiling my skin until it glowed, arranging my hair in elaborate braids woven through with tiny moonstones. The makeup artist worked on my face for an hour, attempting the impossible task of making the scar less prominent without hiding it entirely. We're not concealing, she explained. We're redirecting. See how the color on your eyelids draws attention upward? How the lip color balances the face. I also saw that no amount of paint could change what lay beneath. Getting into the dress required 5 people and 20 minutes. The weight of it was incredible, fabric and embroidery and symbolism pressing down on my shoulders. The train took 2 servants, just to arrange properly. And the veil made the world soft and distant, as if I were already disappearing into the role I was about to play. It's time, Vera said softly. Her eyes were bright with something that might have been pride or pity or both. Are you ready? No. Good. That means you understand what you're walking into. She squeezed my hand quickly. Remember, shoulders back, head high, eyes forward. You're not a victim being led to slaughter. You're a queen accepting her crown. The walk from my chambers to the palace's grand chapel felt endless. Servants lined the corridors, bowing as I passed. I could feel their eyes on me through the veil, assessing, judging, wondering. Word had spread that the king's chosen Omega was unusual. Rumors about my scar, my inability to shift, my barrenness had circulated for weeks. Now they would finally see if the gossip matched reality. The chapel doors loomed ahead, massive wooden constructs carved with scenes of the moon goddess blessing wolves. I could hear the murmur of hundreds of voices beyond them. The entire court had assembled. Every noble family. Every ranking officer. Every person of influence. All waiting to see what their king had chosen. Aldrich appeared beside me, his expression professionally neutral. When the doors open, count to 3, then begin walking. Slow, steady steps. Keep your eyes on the king. Don't look at the crowd. What if I trip? Don't trip. He signaled to the guards at the door. Ready? I wasn't. I would never be. But I nodded anyway. The doors swung open. The chapel fell silent. And I stepped forward into the role I would play for the rest of my life. The chapel was magnificent, all white marble and soaring arches, with stained glass windows that painted the floor in shifting colors. Hundreds of people filled the pews on either side, their faces turning to watch me process down the center aisle. I kept my eyes forward, on the dais at the far end where the king waited. He stood perfectly still, dressed in formal black with silver embroidery that matched my dress. Even from this distance, I could see the crown on his head, not the elaborate one he wore for major ceremonies, but a simpler circlet of silver. His amber eyes were fixed on me, unreadable. The walk felt like it took hours. Every step echoed. The weight of the dress, the veil, the expectations pressed down until I could barely breathe. But I kept moving. 1 foot in front of the other, shoulders back, head high. Like Vera had said, not a victim, but a queen. When I finally reached the dais, I knelt as rehearsed. The king stepped forward and offered his hand. His fingers were warm as they closed around mine, pulling me to my feet. We stood face to face, or as close to it as we could with the veil between us. The high priestess stepped forward. An elderly woman with white hair and eyes like winter sky. She raised her hands, and the chapel fell even more silent. We gather today to witness the binding of 2 souls, she intoned. To see Alpha and Omega joined in the sacred tradition passed down through generations. Before the moon goddess and this assembled court, I ask, Do you come here freely and without coercion? I do, the king said, his voice carrying through the chapel. All eyes turned to me. I do, I whispered. The lie tasted like ash. The priestess produced a silver cord, wrapping it around our joined hands. By this binding, you pledge yourselves to one another, to support, to protect, to honor the bond you create today. She spoke more words, traditional blessings, invocations to the moon goddess, prayers for fertility and prosperity. I barely heard them. All I could focus on was the king's hand in mine, warm and solid, and the hundreds of eyes watching through the veil. Finally, the priestess stepped back. The couple may now exchange their words. This was it, the moment we'd rehearsed. I took a breath and spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. I am something you make, but never see. I can be broken without being touched. I bind two people together, but I have no physical form. What am I? Gasps rippled through the chapel. This wasn't traditional. This wasn't what anyone expected. The king looked at me through the veil, and I saw something flicker in his eyes. Approval, perhaps, or respect. He let the silence stretch, let the question hang in the air. Then, instead of answering, he simply said, I cannot answer here what I will show you in time. More gasps. More whispers. The ambiguity was perfect, romantic enough to satisfy some, mysterious enough to intrigue others. The priestess cleared her throat. The veil may now be lifted. The king's hands moved to the edge of the lace. For just a moment he paused, his amber eyes meeting mine through the gossamer layers. Then, slowly, deliberately, he lifted the veil. The chapel went silent. I stood frozen, my scarred face fully visible in the candlelight. Every flaw, every imperfection, every reason I'd been unwanted my entire life was now on display for hundreds of people to see. The king didn't flinch. Didn't hesitate. Didn't show even a flicker of doubt. Instead, he smiled small, barely there, but genuine. Then he leaned in and kissed me. It was brief, chaste, exactly as rehearsed. But there was something in it, a gentleness I hadn't expected, a reassurance that we were in this together. Whatever this turned out to be. When he pulled back, he kept his hands on my face, framing it deliberately, making sure everyone saw exactly what he'd chosen, making sure there could be no doubt that this was his decision, his desire, his will. My queen, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Then, quieter, just for me, you did perfectly. The priestess raised her hands again. I present to you King Ezekiel and Queen Consort Isla. May the moon goddess bless their union. The chapel erupted in applause, polite, obligatory, but still applause. And just like that, I was married. Chapter 7, The Monster Beneath. The reception was an exercise in endurance. Hundreds of nobles lined up to offer congratulations that didn't quite reach their eyes. They bowed to the king, curtsied to me, and spoke words carefully calibrated to sound respectful while revealing nothing of their true thoughts. What a unique choice, Your Majesty. The Queen Consort has such interesting features. I'm sure you'll be very happy together. Each comment was a small knife, politely sheathed but sharp nonetheless. I smiled until my face ached, thanked them for their kind words, and played the role I'd been trained for. Beside me, Ezekiel, I was supposed to call him that now, not the king, remained perfectly composed, his hand occasionally touching the small of my back in a gesture of public unity. The wedding feast was elaborate, course after course of delicacies I could barely taste. I was too aware of being watched, assessed, catalogued. Every bite I took, every sip of wine, every word I spoke was being judged against some invisible standard I could never meet. The dancing was worse. When Ezekiel led me onto the floor for the bonding spiral, every eye in the room followed us. The music began slow and haunting, played by musicians who'd perfected their craft over decades. Ezekiel's hand settled at my waist, his other hand clasping mine. Just follow my lead, he murmured. Forget everyone else. Impossible. But I tried. We moved through the steps Corvin had drilled into me, circling each other in increasingly tight spirals. Ezekiel was a far better dancer than Corvin, his movements fluid and precise. He guided me through turns I'd struggled with during practice, making them seem effortless. You're doing well, he said quietly as we spun. Better than I expected. High praise. $. His lips twitched. I meant it as a compliment. Did you? Yes. You've exceeded every expectation I had of you. That's rare. The music swelled. We completed the final spiral, ending with me pulled close against his chest, his arms around me, our faces inches apart. In that moment, for the benefit of the watching court, we looked like any other couple bound together, intimate, united. The illusion was perfect. The applause that followed was louder this time. More genuine. Perhaps they wanted to believe in the fairy tale. Perhaps they simply enjoyed a good performance. Other couples joined us on the floor. Nobles and their mates, all of them beautiful, all of them perfectly matched. I danced with various lords as tradition demanded, each one maintaining careful politeness while their eyes drifted to my scar. Ezekiel danced with their wives and daughters, all of them prettier than me, none of them questioning why he hadn't chosen one of them instead. By the time the reception ended, near midnight, I was exhausted. The dress felt like it weighed 100 pounds. The crown they'd placed on my head during the feast, a delicate silver thing with moonstones, gave me a pounding headache. My feet screamed in protest at the hours spent in ceremonial shoes. Ezekiel appeared at my side as the last guests finally departed. Come, we need to talk. He led me not toward the royal chambers I'd been told would be mine, but down. Down through corridors I recognized, past guards who bowed as we passed, down into the obsidian-walled passages beneath the palace. To his chambers. The underground rooms where this had all begun. Why are we here? I asked as he unlocked the heavy door. I told you there were things I needed to explain. Things about why I chose you. He held the door open. Those explanations happen here, where no one can overhear. The room beyond was exactly as I remembered, massive fireplace, walls lined with books, the sense of being cut off from the world above. Ezekiel gestured to one of the chairs by the fire. Sit. You look ready to collapse. I sank into the chair gratefully, not bothering to argue. He poured 2 glasses of wine, handed me one, then moved to stare into the flames, his habitual thinking position. For a long moment he said nothing, then, "What do you know about lycanthropy?" The question caught me off guard. Only the basics. We're born with our wolves. They emerge fully during adolescence. Shifting becomes natural after that. Those who can't shift are anomalies, broken, like me, went unsaid. That's what most people believe. Ezekiel took a long drink of his wine. But there are exceptions. Variations. Types of shifting that aren't spoken about in polite society. What do you mean? He set his glass down and turned to face me. In the firelight, his eyes seemed to glow. I told you once that I wasn't always fit for company. That there were nights when I needed isolation. Do you remember? Yes. When I asked why you lived underground. I live underground because on certain nights, I lose control of my wolf. Not completely, I retain my consciousness, my thoughts. But my ability to control the shift fails. And when that happens, I'm dangerous. My breath caught. How dangerous? The kind of dangerous that requires thick walls and locked doors. The kind that would terrify a normal Omega into running. His jaw tightened. My father had the same affliction. He called it a gift. I call it a curse. When does it happen? Full moons. Always. And occasionally at other times when my emotions run too high, extreme anger, intense fear, sometimes even strong desire. He moved closer, and I could see the strain in his face. Do you understand now why I needed someone barren? Someone who wouldn't trigger the mating instinct that makes the curse worse. The pieces clicked into place with horrible clarity. You can't have a real mate. The bond would make the curse unbearable. Exactly. The mating bond amplifies everything: protectiveness, possessiveness, the need to be near them, the urge to claim them physically. For someone like me, those feelings would trigger shifts I couldn't control. I'd be a danger to anyone I actually loved. So you chose me because you won't love me. I chose you because I can't love you. There's a difference. He ran a hand through his hair, dislodging the silver circlet he'd worn during the ceremony. Your barrenness means I won't feel the drive to breed. Your position as a false mate means the bond won't form fully. You're safe from me, Isla. That's why you're here. I stared at him, trying to process this. Does anyone else know? The High Priestess. A few trusted guards. the physician who treats me after particularly bad nights. His expression was bleak. And now you. The council doesn't know? The council would use it against me, declare me unfit to rule, just as they tried with my father before his mind truly broke. He moved to refill his wineglass. My father's deterioration wasn't just age or stress, it was this curse consuming him slowly. By the end, he was barely human most of the time. The decisions he made, the cruelty he showed, it was the wolf taking over. And you think the same will happen to you. I know it will, eventually, unless I can maintain enough control, enough distance from anything that might trigger the worst of it. He looked at me directly. That's why I needed you. Someone I could present as a mate without risking actual feelings. Someone who would keep me human by keeping me alone. The irony was devastating. I'd been chosen specifically because I was unlovable, because my brokenness matched his. When is the next full moon? 3 nights from now. His amber eyes held mine. I'm telling you this because you have a right to know what you've married into. And because when it happens, you'll hear things. Sounds from down here. The guards will be more vigilant, more tense. I didn't want you to be frightened without understanding why. Will I see you? During the full moon? No. I'll be locked in deeper chambers than these. Rooms specifically designed to contain what I become. He set his glass down with careful precision. You'll be safe in your chambers. I need you to promise me you won't come looking for me during those nights. No matter what you hear. I promise. I mean it, Isla. If you saw me like that, if you saw what I become, you'd never look at me the same way again. What makes you think I'd look at you differently than I already do? That stopped him. What do you mean? You've seen my worst from the beginning. You looked at my scarred face and didn't flinch. You learned I was barren and chose me anyway. You've seen exactly how broken I am. I stood, moving closer to him. Maybe I'm not as frightened of your monster as you think I should be. You don't understand what you're saying, don't I? You're cursed to transform into something you can't fully control. I'm cursed to be something I can't transform into at all. We're both trapped by what we are, what we can't change. I touched the moonstone necklace at my throat, his mother's necklace. You said we're prisoners of different cages. Maybe that means we understand each other better than most people ever could. For a long moment, Ezekiel just looked at me. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or the beginning of respect that went beyond mere appreciation for a useful arrangement. You're not what I expected, he said finally. You've said that before. I'll probably say it many more times. He moved past me toward the door. Come. I'll walk you to your chambers. You need rest. And I need to prepare for the council meeting tomorrow. They'll have questions about our unconventional vows. The riddle. Yes. Be ready to be asked about it. Have an answer prepared that's romantic enough to satisfy them without revealing anything real. We walked through the underground corridors in silence. When we reached the stairs leading up to the palace proper, Ezekiel paused. Thank you, he said quietly. For playing your role today. For not running when I told you the truth just now. He seemed to struggle for words. For being what I needed you to be. A convenient arrangement? A partner who understands. He started up the stairs, then looked back. One more thing. Your chambers are in the east wing, 3rd floor, as we discussed. But if you ever need to speak to me privately, not as king and queen, but as 2 people trying to survive this arrangement, come to the library I had prepared for you. I'll check it each evening after the court has settled. If you're there, we'll talk. It was an unexpected kindness. A thread of connection in what was otherwise supposed to be a transaction. Thank you, I said. He nodded once, then continued up the stairs, leaving me to follow. My chambers as queen consort were magnificent. 3 connected rooms, a bedroom with a bed large enough for 5 people, a sitting room with comfortable furniture and a fireplace, and a private bathing room with a copper tub even larger than the one in my temporary quarters. Everything was decorated in silvers and pale blues, elegant without being ostentatious. It was beautiful. It was lonely. Vera was waiting to help me out of the wedding dress, a process that took nearly as long as getting into it had. When I finally stood in just my shift, I felt like I could breathe again. You did wonderfully today, Vera said as she carefully hung the dress. The court was impressed. The king looked pleased. Did he? more than I've seen him in years. She turned to face me. I know this isn't a traditional match, but I think you might surprise everyone, including yourselves, with how well you work together. I wanted to believe that, but all I could think about was Ezekiel's confession, the curse he carried, the isolation it required, the certainty that anything real between us would only make things worse. After Vera left, I stood at the window looking out at the darkened gardens. Somewhere below, in chambers carved from stone and sealed with iron, my husband was preparing for the night when his curse would take hold, when he would become the monster he feared, and I, his unwanted, broken, convenient wife, would be locked safely away from him, protected from the truth of what he was, just as I'd always been protected from the truth of what I could never be. I touched my scar, then the moonstone at my throat. 2 marks of different curses. 2 reminders that sometimes survival meant accepting that you'd never be whole. The moon hung full and bright in the sky, though not quite at its peak. 3 nights. That's all the time I had before I learned what my husband became when the curse took hold. 3 nights to prepare for the sound of a monster in the darkness. 3 nights to decide if I was brave enough or foolish enough to care about a man who'd been honest enough to tell me I'd never be able to love him. I climbed into the enormous bed and pulled the covers close. Sleep came slowly, full of dreams about riddles with answers I couldn't speak and promises that bound tighter than silver cords. Somewhere in the palace, I knew Ezekiel wasn't sleeping either. Both of us lying awake in separate rooms, bound together by vows we'd never meant and secrets we were only beginning to understand. The first night of our marriage, it felt exactly as hollow as I'd expected, and somehow, unexpectedly, that hollowness ached in ways I hadn't prepared for. Chapter 8. The Beast Revealed. The 3 days before the full moon passed in a strange rhythm of normalcy and dread. During the day, I played my role perfectly. I attended court functions with Ezekiel, sat beside him during council meetings where I was expected to be seen but not heard, smiled at nobles who could barely hide their disappointment in his choice. We moved through the palace like any royal couple, distant but united, formal but coordinated. At night, I was alone in my beautiful chambers, staring at ceilings too high and listening to silence too complete. Ezekiel kept his distance. We spoke only when required, our conversations carefully neutral, always aware of listening ears. But twice I went to the library in the evening and found him there, reading by the fire. We didn't talk much, just sat in companionable silence, 2 people seeking refuge from roles that didn't quite fit. On the second night, he asked me what I was reading. Fairy tales, I admitted, holding up the worn book that had followed me from my father's house. I know it's childish, but it's not childish. He set down his own book, something dense about territorial treaties. What draws you to them? I considered the question carefully. I think they're honest about how dark the world is. Everyone thinks fairy tales are about happy endings, but the old ones aren't. They're about survival. About being clever enough or brave enough, or lucky enough to make it through the darkness. And you identify with that, don't you? I looked at him directly. You're living your own kind of fairy tale. The cursed prince trying to hold on to his humanity. Cursed king, he corrected with a slight smile. And in most fairy tales the curse gets broken. Mine doesn't. Not all curses are meant to be broken. Some are just meant to be survived. He was quiet for a long moment, studying me with those amber eyes. How did you become so wise about darkness? I've lived in it my whole life. You learn the landscape. Something shifted between us in that moment. A recognition, perhaps, that we were more similar than either of us had wanted to admit. Both cursed in our own ways. Both surviving rather than living. Both pretending to be something we weren't for an audience that would never truly accept us. The full moon is tomorrow night, he said finally, his voice dropping. I'll be locked away by sunset. You won't see me for at least a full day after, possibly longer. The transformation is difficult. It takes time to recover. Will you be hurt? Physically? No. The rooms are designed to prevent that. But it's not pleasant. He stood, restless suddenly. The wolf wants things I can't give it. Freedom. Hunt. Connection. Being caged makes it worse, but it's necessary. What does it feel like? The transformation? Like being torn apart and reassembled wrong. Like every instinct you have is being twisted into something violent and hungry. He moved to the fire, his back to me. My father used to say it felt like drowning in your own skin. I never understood what he meant until it happened to me. When did it start? My 21st birthday, the night I came of age to rule if my father died, which he did, 3 months later. His voice was flat, emotionless. The healers said it was the stress of approaching responsibility that triggered the curse. Or maybe it was always there, dormant, waiting for the right moment to destroy me. I moved to stand beside him, looking into the flames. It hasn't destroyed you. Not yet. But it will, eventually. Just like it destroyed my father. He glanced at me. That's why I needed you. Why I need this arrangement to stay exactly what it is: distant, convenient, safe. The moment I care too much about anything or anyone, the curse gets stronger. Emotions feed it. So you've been living without emotions for 7 years. I've been managing them. Carefully. His jaw tightened. Tomorrow night, you'll understand why. The day of the full moon arrived with deceptive normalcy. Clear skies, gentle breeze. Nothing to indicate that night would bring transformation and horror. Ezekiel attended his usual morning councils, met with advisors, reviewed documents that required the royal seal. I sat through another etiquette lesson with Lady Thorne, who had infinite corrections about my posture. But as the afternoon progressed, I noticed changes. Guards became more vigilant. Servants moved with increased urgency. The palace itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Ezekiel found me in my chambers as the sun began its descent. He looked strained, his jaw tight, his movements more controlled than usual. "I'm about to go down," he said without preamble. "I wanted to remind you. Stay in my chambers. Don't come looking for you." I remember. I stood from where I'd been reading. "Will you be all right?" "I'm never all right during the full moon, but I'll survive it." He hesitated, then added, "Lock your doors tonight, all of them. Tell yourself it's just a precaution." "Is it?" "Yes. But tell yourself anyway." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Isla?" "Yes. If you hear things tonight, sounds from below, I need you to remember that whatever makes those sounds isn't entirely me. It's the curse. The wolf. Not the man you married." "I'll remember." He nodded once, then left. I heard his footsteps retreating down the hallway, growing fainter, disappearing, going down into the earth, into chambers designed to cage monsters. I locked my doors as instructed. All 3 of them, the one to the hallway, the one to my bathing room that connected to a servant's passage, and the one to the small balcony overlooking the gardens. Then I sat in my chair by the fire and tried to read. The sun set slowly, painting the sky in shades of orange and red before fading to purple and finally black. The full moon rose huge and silver, so bright it cast shadows through my windows. For the first hour, nothing happened. The palace was quiet except for the usual sounds: guards changing position, servants moving through distant corridors, the wind against stone walls. Then, around midnight, I heard it. A howl. Deep and agonized and utterly inhuman. It came from somewhere far below, muffled by earth and stone, but still audible, still clear enough to make my blood run cold. It wasn't the howl of a normal wolf. It was bigger, rawer, full of rage and pain and something like despair. The sound of something caged and desperate to be free. I set down my book and moved to the window, looking out at the moonlit gardens. Other windows in the palace showed lights, servants and nobles, all of them hearing the same sounds, all of them knowing what they meant. Their king, transforming into the monster he spent his life controlling. Another howl, longer this time, followed by sounds that made my stomach clench, scraping, like claws on stone. Impact sounds, as if something massive was throwing itself against walls. And underneath it all, a low, continuous growl that spoke of fury barely contained. I pressed my hands against the cool glass and thought about Ezekiel down there in the darkness. Conscious but out of control. Human enough to know what was happening but not human enough to stop it. Trapped between man and beast, belonging fully to neither. The sounds continued for hours, sometimes quieter, sometimes so loud I was certain he must be tearing his prison apart. I imagined him in those deep chambers, massive, fur-covered, more beast than man but with amber eyes that still held human intelligence, fighting the bars that kept him caged, fighting the instincts that demanded freedom, hunt, blood, fighting himself. Dawn was beginning to gray the sky when the sounds finally stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse than the noise had been. I didn't sleep that day. I couldn't. I sat in my chair, staring at nothing, thinking about the man I'd married, and the curse that owned him. Thinking about promises that couldn't be kept and fairy tales that didn't have happy endings. Vera came by in the afternoon with food I didn't eat. "The king is recovering," she said quietly. "It was a difficult transformation, but he's uninjured. When will I see him? Tomorrow, perhaps. He needs time." She hesitated. "This is your first full moon as his wife. It's harder the first time, hearing it. But you'll adjust. Adjust." As if the sound of your husband being torn apart by his own curse was something you could get used to. But maybe Vera was right. Maybe everything became bearable if you experienced it enough times. Maybe horror became routine, and routine became survival. I'd survived everything else life had thrown at me. I could survive this too. Ezekiel appeared at my door the next evening, just after sunset. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, his skin pale, his movements careful as if his body ached. But he was human, fully, completely human. "May I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside. He entered slowly, moving to the chair by my fire, the one I'd sat in all through his transformation, and lowered himself into it with a quiet groan. "You heard," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes. And you're still here. You didn't run." "Where would I run to? This is my cage too now, remember?" He almost smiled. "Fair point." He leaned his head back against the chair, closing his eyes. It was worse this time. The wolf was angry. It knew there was someone new in the palace. Someone it wanted to reach. My breath caught. "Me?" "Yes. Not to hurt the wolf doesn't want to hurt you. It wants to." He opened his eyes, looking at me with an expression I couldn't read. "It wants to protect you. It sensed your mind somehow. Part of the pack, even if we're not truly mated. And being unable to reach you, unable to verify you were safe. It made the rage worse." "I don't understand." "You said emotions make the curse worse. But wanting to protect me is an emotion I can't afford." His voice was sharp. "That's exactly the problem, Isla. The wolf is already forming attachments I didn't want it to form. Seeing you as mine to protect. And the more it does that, the harder the transformations will become. So what do? We maintain distance. We keep this exactly what it's supposed to be, a convenient arrangement. No real connection beyond what's necessary for appearances." He sat forward, his elbows on his knees. "The council is already questioning our vows. The riddle, the lack of traditional promises, they're suspicious. We need to give them reassurance without giving them truth." "How?" "There's a winter festival in 2 weeks. All the noble families attend. It's formal but also intimate. Couples dance, exchange gifts, show their bonds publicly." His amber eyes met mine. "We need to convince them we're a real match. That I chose you because I want you. Not because you're convenient. So we perform even more convincingly." "Yes." "Which means spending more time together, learning each other's mannerisms, seeming comfortable in ways that suggest genuine intimacy." He ran a hand through his hair. "I know it's not what we agreed to. But the council holds power I can't ignore. If they decide to challenge my fitness to rule, this kingdom will descend into chaos." I moved to sit in the chair across from him. "What do you need me to do?" "Be seen with me more. Not just at formal functions, but in smaller settings. The gardens, the library, private dinners. Let people see us together in ways that seem natural, unguarded." He hesitated. "And we'll need to be more physically comfortable with each other. Nothing inappropriate, but small touches, familiar gestures. The kind of thing actual mates do without thinking." "You want me to pretend to be in love with you. I want you to pretend to be comfortable with me. Love can come later, as far as they're concerned." His expression was carefully neutral. "Can you do that? After what you heard last night, can you look at me and act like I'm not a monster?" I studied him, this exhausted, cursed king who'd been honest enough to show me his worst and ask if I could survive it. "You're not a monster, Ezekiel. You're a man with a curse. There's a difference." Most people wouldn't see it that way. I'm not most people. I stood and moved closer to him. You've seen my scars. I've heard your beast. We're both broken in ways most people can't understand. Maybe that means we're the only ones who can truly accept each other. You're being romantic about a curse and an arrangement. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just tired of everyone telling me what I should feel. I held out my hand. We have 2 weeks until the winter festival. We should practice being comfortable with each other. He looked at my hand for a long moment. Then, slowly, he took it. His palm was warm against mine, his fingers rough with calluses from sword training. He stood, and suddenly we were very close, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his amber eyes, smell the scent of pine and smoke that clung to him. This is practice, he said quietly. Nothing more. I know. I need you to remember that. No matter how convincing the performance becomes, I will. But even as I said it, I wondered if either of us truly believed it. Because standing there with his hand in mine, both of us scarred in different ways, both of us surviving curses we couldn't break, it felt like something more than performance. It felt like recognition. And that, I suspected, was more dangerous than any curse. The 2 weeks before the winter festival became a careful dance of proximity and distance. Ezekiel and I took breakfast together in his study, private enough to seem intimate, formal enough to maintain boundaries. We walked the gardens in the afternoons, his hand occasionally touching my lower back in a gesture that looked protective but felt calculated. We spent evenings in the library, sometimes reading in silence, sometimes discussing politics or history. He was teaching me about the kingdom I was now supposed to help rule, and I found myself actually interested. The way territories had been formed, the alliances that held everything together, the careful balance of power that kept the peace. You're good at this, he said one evening, after I'd analyzed a particularly complex treaty dispute, understanding the nuances, seeing past the obvious positions to the real motivations underneath. Years of being invisible teaches you to observe carefully, I replied. When no one thinks you're paying attention, you learn to see what they're really saying. Use that at the winter festival. Watch the nobles, their reactions to us. Tell me afterward what you saw. I need eyes I can trust. It felt like being given a real task, a purpose beyond just standing beside him and looking appropriate. I can do that. As we practiced our public interactions, something strange began to happen. The touches that were supposed to be performance started feeling natural. The smiles we exchanged for the benefit of watching servants stopped feeling entirely fake. When Ezekiel would absently tuck a strand of hair behind my ear, or I would straighten his collar without thinking, it wasn't always calculated. Sometimes it was just comfortable. The night before the winter festival, I found him in the library later than usual. He sat staring into the fire, a glass of wine forgotten in his hand. Can't sleep? I asked, settling into my usual chair. The festival will be a test, he said without preamble. The council will be watching for any sign that our marriage is a sham. If they find one, they'll use it to question my judgment, my fitness to rule. Then we won't give them one. He looked at me, and something in his expression made my breath catch. I don't deserve your loyalty, Isla. I bought it with promises of books and safety. That's not real. Maybe not. But it's honest. And maybe honest is better than whatever most marriages are built on. I stood and moved to stand beside him. Tomorrow, we'll dance. We'll smile. We'll convince everyone watching that you chose me because you see something in me worth choosing. And maybe, for that night at least, it won't entirely be a lie. His hand reached up, his fingers brushing my scar in that gesture that had become familiar between us. When did you stop being afraid of me? I'm still afraid of you. But I'm more afraid of going back to being nothing. I covered his hand with mine, pressing it against my cheek. At least here, as your convenient arrangement, I'm something. That's more than I had before. That's the saddest thing I've ever heard. Yes, I agreed, but it's true, and truth, as you taught me, matters more than pretty lies. We stayed like that for a moment, his hand on my face, mine covering it, both of us balanced on the edge of something neither of us fully understood. Then he pulled away, standing abruptly. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be long. He moved toward the door, then paused. Wear the silver dress. The one with the moonstone embroidery. Why that one? Because it makes you look like starlight. He said it matter-of-factly, as if commenting on the weather. And tomorrow, I need everyone to see what I see when I look at you. What do you see? But he was already gone, leaving me alone with the fire and the question and the dangerous feeling that this arrangement was becoming far more complicated than either of us had intended. Tomorrow, the winter festival. Tomorrow, we would perform our most convincing act yet. Tomorrow, I would discover whether what we'd built between us was strong enough to fool everyone watching, or if it was already real enough to destroy us both. Epilogue. The winter festival. The great hall had been transformed into a winter wonderland. Ice sculptures caught the candlelight and threw rainbows across the marble floors. White flowers cascaded from every surface. Silver and crystal decorations hung from the vaulted ceiling like frozen stars. It was breathtaking, the kind of beauty that felt almost painful to witness. I stood at the entrance in the silver dress Ezekiel had requested, moonstone embroidery catching the light with every breath. Vera had woven matching stones through my hair, and for once, the severe style actually suited me. I looked like I belonged in this fairy tale setting, at least from the right side. Ezekiel appeared beside me, dressed in formal black with silver threading that complemented my gown perfectly. Someone had planned our coordination carefully, another detail in the performance we were staging. "Ready?" he asked quietly, offering his arm. I took it, feeling the solid warmth of him beneath the expensive fabric. As ready as I'll ever be. We entered together, and the room fell silent. All eyes turned to us, assessing, judging, searching for any crack in the facade we'd built. The king and his scarred queen, the powerful alpha and the broken omega. The match that made no sense to anyone but us. Ezekiel guided me through the crowd with easy confidence, stopping to greet nobles and accept their congratulations on our marriage. I smiled and nodded, and said the appropriate things while watching, observing, cataloging reactions the way he'd asked me to. Lord Reston's wife couldn't stop staring at my scar, even as she complimented my dress. Lady Thorne's family smiled too widely, the kind of smile that hid daggers. The younger nobles watched Ezekiel with a mixture of desire and confusion, clearly unable to understand why he'd chosen me when he could have had any of them. But there were others, older couples, people who'd weathered their own storms, who looked at us with something like understanding, as if they recognized what we were, two damaged people finding a way to survive together. The dancing began, and Ezekiel led me onto the floor for the opening waltz. His hand settled at my waist with practiced ease, his other hand clasping mine. We'd danced this dance dozens of times in practice, but this time felt different. This time, hundreds of people watched our every movement. "You're tense," he murmured as we began to move. "Relax, let me lead. Everyone's watching. Let them watch. Show them we have nothing to hide." The music swelled, and we spun across the floor in perfect synchronization. Ezekiel was an excellent dancer, his movements fluid and confident. He guided me through turns and spirals, making me look graceful even when I stumbled slightly. His eyes never left mine, maintaining the illusion of complete absorption in his partner. "In me. You're doing perfectly," he said softly. "Better than perfectly. You're a good actor. So are you." His hand tightened slightly at my waist, or maybe we've been doing this long enough that it stopped being entirely an act. The admission hung between us as we danced. Because he was right, somewhere in the past few weeks, the performance had blurred into something more complicated. The touches had become familiar. The conversations had become genuine. The comfort we showed in each other's presence had stopped being entirely calculated. We'd become something neither of us had intended. Actual partners. Not lovers. Not in the traditional sense. But partners nonetheless, two people who understood each other's darkness and chose to stand together anyway. The dance ended, and Ezekiel pulled me close in the final pose. His forehead nearly touched mine, our faces inches apart, his breath warm against my skin. For the benefit of the watching crowd, he smiled soft and genuine, and nothing like the cold, controlled king most people knew. "Thank you," he whispered, so quietly only I could hear. "For what?" "For being exactly what I needed. Even when I didn't know what that was." Then he kissed me. Not the brief, ceremonial kiss from our wedding, but something deeper, something that felt less like performance, and more like promise. His lips were warm and sure, his hand cupping my face, his thumb brushing across my scar in that now familiar gesture. The room erupted in applause, but I barely heard it. All I could focus on was the man holding me, the unexpected gentleness in his touch, the way this felt both exactly like what we'd planned, and nothing like it at all. When he pulled back, his amber eyes held mine for a long moment. "Too much?" he asked. "No," I breathed. "Just enough." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversations and dances and careful observations. I watched the nobles as Ezekiel had asked, noting who seemed genuinely pleased by our match and who was clearly plotting against it. I would tell him later, in the privacy of the library, what I'd seen. For now, I played my role perfectly. The devoted wife. The comfortable partner. The Omega who'd somehow captured her king's attention despite every reason she shouldn't have. As the night drew to a close, Ezekiel and I stood on the balcony overlooking the gardens. The winter air was cold enough to make our breath fog, but neither of us moved to go inside. Below us, nobles filtered out of the great hall, heading back to their chambers or carriages, their voices carrying in the quiet night. "You were magnificent tonight," Ezekiel said, staring out at the moonlit gardens. The council members I spoke with were impressed, reassured. So the performance worked. Yes. He turned to look at me. "But Isla, I need to ask you something. And I need you to be honest. Always. Are you happy? Here, in this arrangement? Or are you just surviving it?" The question caught me off guard. I thought about it carefully, searching for the truth beneath the layers of performance and adaptation. "I don't know if happy is the right word," I said finally, "but I'm not unhappy. For the first time in my life, I have purpose, value, a place where I'm not just tolerated but needed. That's more than I ever had before. Even though you'll never have love, a real mate, children, I was never going to have those things anyway. At least here I have books and safety and..." I hesitated. "And someone who sees me as more than just broken." His expression softened. "You were never broken, Isla. You were just in the wrong place, surrounded by people too blind to see your value. So were you." I moved closer, looking up at him. A cursed king, pretending to be in control, terrified of becoming his father. We're both just trying to survive curses we didn't choose. And somehow, surviving together is easier than surviving alone. Yes. He reached out, his hand cupping my cheek in that gesture that had become so familiar between us. "I can't give you everything a mate should have. No mating bond, no children, no promises of eternal devotion. But I can give you honesty, partnership, respect. Is that enough?" I thought about my life before, invisible, unwanted, waiting for a future that would never come. Then I thought about now, standing beside a king, wearing his mother's jewelry, playing a role that had somehow become real enough to matter. "It's enough," I said. "It's more than enough." He smiled, rare and genuine, and nothing like the controlled expressions he showed the court. Then he kissed my forehead, gentle and careful, as if I were something precious rather than convenient. "Come," he said, offering his arm. "It's late, and you must be exhausted." He walked me to my chambers, a courtesy he'd started performing after the full moon. At my door, he paused. "The next full moon is in 3 weeks, he said quietly. "It won't be any easier to hear. I know, but you'll survive it. We both will." He nodded once, then turned to leave. But at the end of the corridor, he looked back. "Isla?" "Yes?" "The riddle, the one you asked at our wedding. I know I didn't answer it publicly, but..." He paused. "The answer is a promise. And tonight, standing beside you, I realized I've made one without meaning to." "What promise?" "That as long as you're here, playing this role with me, you'll never be nothing again. You'll be my partner, my equal in this arrangement, the person I trust more than anyone." His amber eyes caught the lamplight. "That's the promise I couldn't speak aloud. The one I didn't know I was making until it was already made." Before I could respond, he disappeared down the corridor, leaving me alone with my racing heart and the impossible realization that somewhere along the way, this convenient arrangement had become something neither of us could name. Not love. Not yet. And maybe not ever. But something real. Something that mattered. Something worth surviving for. I entered my chambers and moved to the window, looking out at the moonlit gardens, In 3 weeks, I would hear him transform again. In 3 months, we'd face another test from the council. In 3 years, who knew what challenges would come? But tonight, I was the queen consort of a cursed king. I was the scarred Omega who'd been chosen not despite her brokenness but because of it. I was the girl who'd survived being unwanted long enough to discover that being wanted for the wrong reasons could somehow transform into being valued for the right ones. I touched the moonstone at my throat, his mother's necklace, now mine. Then I touched my scar, that mark of old pain that had defined me for so long. Both were part of who I was now. Both were part of what had brought me here. And here, I realized, was exactly where I was supposed to be. Not in a fairy tale ending with true love's kiss and magical transformations, but in something better. A honest partnership between 2 cursed people who'd found a way to survive their darkness together. It wasn't the story I'd dreamed of as a girl reading fairy tales. But it was real. And real, I'd learned, was far more valuable than any fantasy. I climbed into bed and pulled the covers close, falling asleep with the memory of Ezekiel's kiss still warm on my lips, and the certainty that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new performances, new moments of truth disguised as lies. But I would face them. We both would. Together, in the only way we knew how, honest about our brokenness, accepting of our curses, and determined to make something worthwhile out of what we'd been given. The Alpha King had claimed the Omega no one wanted. And somehow, in the claiming, we'd both found something neither of us knew we needed. Each other. Thank you for experiencing this emotional journey with Isla and Ezekiel. Loved this story? If this tale of broken hearts finding unexpected partnership resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more deeply emotional fantasy romance stories. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What was your favorite moment between Isla and Ezekiel? Did the riddle's meaning surprise you? Would you have made the same choices Isla did? Your engagement helps us create more stories like this tales that explore the complicated beauty of finding connection in unexpected places. New stories released every week. Subscribe now and join our community of romance fantasy lovers.